Dallas. Hello, everyone. My name is Jarrett Hill. I am a politics and pop culture journalist called Fanti. I want to welcome you to the Power Hour from Equality California. We're really, really excited to talk today with my esteemed panel of guests, and I want to let you meet all of them before we really jump into this conversation. So up first, I would love to have the Honorable Dallas Harris. If you would introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hill, for the introduction. My name is Dallas Harris. I am a state senator here in Las Vegas, Nevada. I represent the 11th district, which is in the southwest part of Clark County. I'm also a board member, a proud board member of Silver State Equality, and I'm proud to be here today. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Okay. Up next, let's meet the Honorable Sydney Kamlager Dove.
Thank you, Jarrett. My name is Sydney Kamlager Dove. I am an assemblywoman representing the 54th State Assembly District in the big old state of California. The 54th includes all of Culver City, some portions of the West Side, the VA hospital, UCLA, for any Bruins out there, a little bit of Inglewood, Mid-City, and Ladera Heights. And I'm so happy to be here. I'm an ally of EQCA and a board member of Planned Parenthood LA, which is also where Rick Zuber, who is the executive director for EQCA, sits on the board with me as well. Very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. All right, let's meet André Wade.
Hello, André Wade. I am State Director for Silver State Equality. We are a statewide LGBTQ civil rights organization here in Nevada, focused on passing poor equality legislation, getting poor equality candidates elected, and advocacy and education. I'm a Las Vegas native and also teach gender, race, class, and sexuality at UNLV, the Interdisciplinary Gender and Ethnic Studies class department.
Nice. Okay. And then finally, let's meet Imani Rupert-Gordon.
Good evening, Jarrett. Thank you so much. My name's Imani Rupert-Gordon. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm the executive director for the National Center for Lesbian Rights. And NCLR is a national legal organization that improves the lives of LGBTQ people and our families through impact litigation, legislation, public policy and advocacy, and education. So happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I kind of want to just take the temperature in the room first. We are all in the same moment, and it's a very layered moment, obviously, with protests happening in every state around in the union, COVID-19, and so many different things that are impacting all of us. I'd love to get some perspective on how everyone is processing these moments right now. How are you? How are you feeling? How are you thinking? How has the last week and a half kind of resonated for you personally? And if anyone wants to jump in first, you can. Imani, you're unmuted, so I'll come to you first. Talk to me about what this last week has been like to you.
Sure. You know, I think like most folks, this has been definitely a difficult week. And the last couple of weeks, the last month, you know, the world looks very different than it did. And I don't want to say it looks different because we're seeing something, but we are going through a collective moment right now where there are a lot of people seeing something, recognizing that there's a pattern here and pushing to make change. And so there is something that's different about this moment. And a lot of it is painful watching a lot of this at once. But also I'm hopeful. And I'm also inspired by really amazing folks that are out right now that are making us proud. You know, this is a really difficult time and it's a really painful time, but we're also seeing a great deal of strength from people in our community. And I feel really, really proud to be here.
Let's go to Sydney Kamlager. I want to know, from the work that you do, from the place that you sit professionally, talk to me about what's been on your mind this last week.
Every single thing, including how to make sure my head does not explode. Yes. You know, we started the year off with lots of hope and excitement in California. We had a $200 billion budget. We were talking about making real investments in our safety net services, again, making sure that we were going to lift everyone up. We heard a passionate speech from our governor about housing and homelessness and how that needed to be our #1 priority, given the fact that 56% of all folks who are homeless reside in the state of California, and then half of those people are Black folks. We know that many of those folks in that number also include members of the LGBTQ community, specifically youth and teenagers. So we were excited. And then COVID happened, and it was a shutdown. And as we were processing what this pandemic meant to everyone, data started coming out saying, oh, and by the way, if you're poor, if you're Black, if you're brown, if you're poor, if you're Black, if you're brown, you have a disproportionate, you're more likely than not to have contracted COVID or to perhaps have died from COVID if you had died. So we're starting to look at that. I have to say, in the back of my mind, I started thinking about the HIV/AIDS epidemic. And I was like, well, who is collecting the data on our LGBTQ community? Because are we also looking and tracking to see what's happening to our brothers and sisters who are gay and lesbian and trans? Before that could happen, we had this race explosion, which there was like a bubbling up, right? There was the Christian Cooper, there was the Ahmaud Arbery, and then the crescendo with George Floyd, in the midst of our own reckoning of a huge economic deficit that we were going to have to figure out how to get out of. So it's been this compression of so many larger than life issues that we have to come to terms with. And the only word that really continues to pop in my mind is complicitness. And how many of us have been complicit in the indifference that has been allowed to fester, which has exploded in this moment. And we have to seize this moment and say, now is the time for systemic change.
A lot. That's really heavy. I think
that's why my head was exploding.
No, I think a lot of us have been kind of in that space of thinking about how multi-layered this moment is, with so many things to consider. And I think that has definitely been a part of why it's been so heavy for me. I feel like it's been really, really challenging this last couple of days, and I can physically feel it with anxiety and concern. So, André, talk to me about what's been top of mind for you this last week.
Anyone who knows me will probably say that I was even-tempered and mild-mannered, but anger was something that I was really feeling last week and over the weekend. Sadness, exhaustion, being traumatized for constantly seeing Black bodies killed, being videotaped and consumed, and it seeming never ending. You could easily go off social media or not pay attention to the news and have someone say, hey, did you hear about what happened over the weekend? You're just like, what now? Or which time even? And so I'm at the point where I am having hard conversations with my non-Black friends and just saying like, yo, we need your help and we need you on board. This is going to take the work of all of us, especially you all, to be a part of addressing, racism and anti-Black sentiment. And if you need some help getting there, here are some resources for you. We're here to talk to you and help you through it, but you have to do the work. And so I'm at the point of just going through all the stages, but then also wanting to do something. So having a conversation like this and watching other conversations unfold is helpful and cathartic for me. But I'm also just really ready to be a part of change, because this moment is like many other moments that have happened throughout history, but there's something that feels different about the protests going on right now. But I'm just hoping that it's just not my Pollyanna hopefulness that's thinking that it's different, when there's actually going to be something that starts to change that comes out of this.
I can relate to, I feel like I've always been a really optimistic person. And one of my friends was like, "Oh, I feel like you see the good in everybody," and like as if that were a bad thing. But lately, I have not had that same level of optimism. I've been feeling just profound concern and pessimism, to be honest. I want to know, you all have all mentioned about how this moment feels different. And I want to lean into the positive at the top here. Like, what has been giving you inspiration as we are kind of traversing through this moment? And I want to get to that. But Dallas is rejoining us now. And I was asking everyone, what has been top of mind for you over the last week as we've been seeing these protests around the country on top of COVID-19? And I would love for you to be able to answer that question as well.
Yes, thank you so much. Sorry, I have a small dog. He doesn't care that I'm a state senator, doesn't respect my authority at all. Please try and excuse him while I attempt to answer your question, which is a great one. What's really been on top of mind for me is the question, what is different? What is it that's so different about George Floyd that's kind of sparked the protests? I can think of, off the top of my head, 5 or 6 other videos of innocent Black or colored or people of color who pose no danger being killed for absolutely no reason. And so I've been kind of thinking about what makes this the camel that is, proverbially broken the back, right? The straw that breaks the camel's back. Because this event, to me, unfortunately, is fairly unremarkable. It's something that I've known for a very long time has happened in America, if not every day, every other day. And so that's what I've been grappling with is, what was different? What's made a spark? And are we actually going to take this chance and do something different?
We were all kind of chiming in with that idea that this does feel like a different moment. And as I was saying, I would love to hear, kind of starting out, what kinds of things are you seeing that make this moment feel hopeful for you? I'll let Dallas, I'll let you start there this time.
Sure. I'll tell you what's making me hopeful are the phone calls I'm getting asking people, with people asking me, what can I do? Asking, people wanting to take action. That's what we need. We don't need talk. In the context of school shootings, right? They long say we don't need thoughts and prayers. What we need is action. And so the most hopeful thing to me is people constantly calling me, asking, what can I do to actually make some change? And that makes me the most hopeful that something might be able to be done to actually reform the system. The hardest part on the other side is not quite having the right answers for them, right? I mean, I don't know if I know how to fight 400 years plus of oppression and what we can do. It's not one step, it's 100, it's 1,000 steps we've got to take to reverse ourselves from where we are today, because it was 1,000 steps or more, that got us here. And, we're going to have to pursue the changing of the system with the same vigor with which it was established.
Dallas, you really kind of hit on the piece that was making me so pessimistic, and that this issue isn't just about police, right? Like, I mean, ultimately, I feel like this really, if we boil it down, reduce it down to what it really is, this is all about white supremacy and how it shows up in anti-Blackness and how it shows up in our world every day. And then there are the glimmers of hope that we're seeing in various different places. Imani, talk to me about what's giving you hope in this moment? What's encouraging you out of all this right now?
I'm seeing hope because this is how change happens in our country. We're talking about this, but the conversation is really interesting too. I think there are so many times that during when we see rebellions, when we see unrest, that there's also a distraction going on, that folks are trying to change the conversation so that we're not talking about what we're talking about anymore, but people are actually questioning the way that someone's going about creating this change. And what I really appreciate is that we know that this is how change happens in this country. Anything that's ever happened in this country, it's because it started because people have been in the streets. And people have been in the streets, and that's what's led to structural change. And so seeing this happen is I'm very excited about this. And then also that more people are calling out that this is a tactic that's being used, that when there's a distraction or diversion from the actual issue, that more people are calling that out and using all of the channels that we have to do that. I think for a long time we've been talking about what it looks like to have cameras in our pockets, to have access to social media, to have access to so many people at once, and to see how people are being so strong and looking at, hey, this is what we're talking about, and I won't let you change what we're talking about. This is actually the problem. And so that's given me a great deal of hope, and knowing that this is how we get change in this country. So that seeing folks out there, they're not doing the wrong thing. This is how change has always happened. And so that's given me a great deal of hope.
Assemblymember Kamlager, some question.
Yeah, so I have some hope. I mean, after all of this, the California Legislative Black Caucus got up. We reiterated a number of bills that are part of our agenda to have alternatives to traditional law enforcement as emergency first responders, by instead utilizing community organizations as emergency responders, revamping, changing, reforming the probation system, looking at reparations, looking at repealing Prop 209, which was the anti-affirmative action bill. So all of these bills are part of the Black Caucus's agenda. We talked about them, and folks were coming out of the woodwork, right? All of a sudden saying, yes, how can we get on board? So I'm, cautiously optimistic. I'm hoping that courage will stay, but it was a nice thing to see. The mayor of Los Angeles and the city council shaved off about $100 to $150 million from the LAPD's budget. So that's a glimmer of hope. So there are things, right? Folks are stepping up saying, how can I support these bills? How can we look at what our policing looks like? But that is just superficial to a lot of the statistics that we know are true, right? 1 in 10 Black men are in jail every single minute of the day. We know that 30% of Black men have been in state or federal prison. We know that 40% of Black men have been touched by the jail system, the prison system, or on probation. We know that 30% of Black men made absolutely zero in 2014, made no income. So on top of what we're seeing, we also have to process that system change requires us having a real hard conversation about housing, about economics, as well as about criminal justice. And I don't know how long people's backbone and constitution will allow them to stay in these uncomfortable conversations to talk about how we create that change. But I will say that a good friend of mine, I saw this on Instagram. She sent something out and she said, to all my fellow, white women, DM me, because we need to have a conversation about the Karens, and we need to have a conversation about what our role is in moving this moment forward in a way that is positive and compassionate, and in a way that has us embark on some self-reflection. So I don't know how that went, because I'm not a white woman and I'm not a Karen, but I had to appreciate the fact that she was willing to put that out there and say, hey, white women, are you an ally, or are you gonna continue to remain indifferent to what's going on? So, all that, right? You have to sift through it, but those things give me hope, but they just have to be constant.
I host a show called Fans High, and we had someone on today talking about Karen needs to go to jail. And we laughed and we're like, but also yes, right? So we think about Karen.
Karen committed a crime.
Yes, exactly. And Karen, also I feel bad for all the Black women named Karen around the world. And the good white ones too. But I think about this moment, and Andre, I would want to come to you and ask you, looking at this from a policy perspective, what are the ways that you see that we can take the momentum that is building right now and be able to translate that into something that will be longer lasting, considering the historical context of anti-Black racism in this country?
I think it starts in the schools. We have to start educating our kids about the history of America in all its glory, in all its failure, and in all its greatness. The reason why we have a lot of white people and non-Black people not really understand what's going on is because they have no idea how we got here. They think slavery, it ended. They might know about Jim Crow. They know about segregation, MLK, civil rights, and that's it. Then everything else is up to us. But they don't understand that for 600 years, this has been the framework, this has been the agenda to keep Black people as second-class, subhuman people. And so how do you tell people in 2020 that it goes beyond the 1960s or even the 1950s, that we have had this social contract with the Declaration of Independence. We have this aspirational sense of the greatness of America, but that social contract is always broken. But if people don't understand history and the struggle of Black people and the contributions of Black people to this country, they'll never understand. History has been retold, erased, reimagined. And so people think that we are claiming foul when nothing really happened. We didn't get to this moment just because Black people are lazy, uneducated, unwilling. Like, no, we have been at this for 600 years, and every time we make any progress, we're set back. The last time we had any sort of economic advancement was in the 1970s. And they made sure through policy and regulations through the Reagan era and starting with Nixon to make sure that that didn't happen. So we have to get policies in place in schools to start educating our kids. But then we have to get people to understand things like affirmative action isn't something that we want because we need, because we just want a leg up. This is in place because there was this recognition that things were done badly to Black people. And so there was attempt to correct things. And so I need folks to educate themselves, if not in school, at home. And if it can't be done through policy, people need to do it through people themselves.
Imani.
And Jarrett, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Dallas.
You know, straight on about education. Anyone who's watching our broadcast today, you know, with us being here in Las Vegas, October 1, you know, kind of stands out as a really heart-wrenching day, right, for our community here, where 58 people died, and it's been widely reported as, you know, the greatest mass killing in recent human history. You know, I will encourage everyone here to look up Black Wall Street and how many people historians believe died there. It's somewhere between 30 and 300. You know, we're talking about African-American businesses, doctors, accountants, professionals. That's generational wealth that was lost. You know, it's not just those lives. That is a ripple effect throughout our country that it's really hard to really understand the impact of, right? That's home ownership, that's property, that's businesses that could have been handed down to sons and daughters to kind of build that systemic wealth that white people in this country have had as they came over and took it, right? So, you know, I just think that's just one example of where history has kind of failed us, and we're really not in a proper context when we're discussing some of these issues and why we are where we are today.
Imani, I think you wanted to jump in.
I did. Thank you so much. Actually, and it has right to do with what you said, and André, the wonderful examples that you gave. I think it's never as clear as when we look at how our government is set up. It's not that racism is so insidious, and we see it, and it's there in ways that we're not even looking at. And so I think obvious ways we think about slavery and Jim Crow laws, but Black Wall Street is a wonderful example. But something that I always think about is the GI Bill. And I know this was a long time ago, but the GI Bill was happened after World War II that made it possible for veterans after coming home having some different social support. So provided loans and grants to go to school, loans to start small businesses. But what people most remember it for is that it basically made it possible for people to buy homes in this country for really the first time ever, and doing it basically by putting down a down payment, a relatively low down payment, and then paying off this loan at a relatively low interest rate over 30 years. Because before this, you had to put down like 50% of the home costs and then pay the rest over 5 years. So this made it possible for people to own homes in this country for the first time. And there's nothing inherently racist about that. It's actually going to be a wonderful support for a lot of people. But how we actually roll this out is where we sort of racialize how we're supporting people in our country. And so it's not this policy, it's not this bill in particular, but the FHA, the Federal Housing Administration, the way they decided to give loans is how it became racialized. And this is the part that we all know, that once redlining happened, that people of color and Black people were only able to buy houses in certain areas. And so they were also then only able to accumulate wealth and equity in houses based on where they were. And so when white folks would move out to the suburbs, this basically, and then also with the resources, what happened is that our government then actually subsidized white families while we are penalizing Black families who never had a chance to accumulate wealth. And when we think about wealth in this country, most people own wealth because their wealth is very closely tied to home ownership, and specifically the home that they live in. And so if how we are supporting folks has any sort of racial implications, that's something that's going to continue to racialize. And that's something that we still see results of today. So the ways that our neighborhoods are segregated, this very specifically has to do with how redlining happened. And then when we see that neighborhoods are still under-resourced, are still over-policed, we see that these neighborhoods aren't safer because of police. They're not safe, they don't have resources, and people are much more likely to be in prisons and other institutions coming out, making it harder for them to make a living or make a living wage. And so we see that even when we are, that if we're not intentional about being anti-racist, then if we're not intentional about that, then something is going to end up racist. And that's going to happen even at the federal level. And so we want to make sure that that's what we're paying attention to. How do we actually protect folks from discrimination, but also from institutional racism that really is just in the air we breathe, that we need to do something about that, because all of this is a result of how we roll out these systems, that if we aren't actively and consistently being anti-racist, then our system is inherently racist, and so it will be rolled out that way.
I think you hit on a lot of really great points there, and really bringing this to the idea of the revision of history, right? And the ways that history has really impacted where we are today. I wanted to take this question that we have from someone in the audience. Her name is Barbara. And I think her question really kind of asks something that I think is really in there. She says, "Hi, we're two white women with two beautiful mixed kids. How do I tell my 4-year-olds what is going on, or should I even?" And I think that, André, when you're talking about the revision of history, or the misunderstanding of history, I think it's a really great thing that Barbara could really use some help with. So anyone that wants to kind of jump in, I know we're on a video platform, so it's not as easy to just to jump in, but Sydney, would you like to jump in on this one? and kind of talk about like how should that get addressed?
Sure. So 4 is kind of young, and I don't know how that happens, but we can have all kinds of conversations with young people, and I think they're far more astute than we give them credit for. You know, you have to just be honest. And as Dallas said, sometimes we don't have all of the answers, and sometimes that's not what's most important, to have an easy, quick fix to what this is, but it's to listen and to help folks understand what it is that's going on, because Barbara may not know actually how her young children are processing this. So I would encourage folks to ask questions of your young people to get a sense of their emotional and physiological space. You know, I went to college at USC. I was here when the riots happened in '92. I am mixed race myself. My father is white. And, you know, I had never been through anything like that before. And although I was in college, it afforded us a real opportunity to have an uncomfortable conversation about what it would be like if protesters saw a Black girl and a white man in a car escaping, you know, from school to safety. And it's tough, right? To be able to look at the person next to you who is your parent and say, both of us might be put in harm's way because we happen to be the races that we are that people see. And I'm sure it was really hard for him because he loves me. I'm his child. But he was concerned about me being hurt because, you know, folks would just get the wrong impression. And that's really tough. That's tough for any parent and child to have to talk about. But it has to be shared and uncovered, because at the bottom of all of that is love, and it is resolve. And hopefully it encourages some kind of compassion or empathy about the resilience that these young 4-year-old babies have to have as they continue to grow and interact with the people that are in their schools or at their playgrounds or come to their homes for play dates. Because what we don't want to do is breed and raise indifference, which then turns into complacency, which then becomes, you know, racist.
Anyone else want to jump in on how to talk to children? Maybe not necessarily at 4 years old, but how would you be talking to children, or how would you guide someone on talking to children? Dallas, I see you.
Yeah, so, you know, I'm no parenting expert or child psychologist, but I think the simple answer is teach your children who they are and what that means in their environment, right? If you have 2 young African-American female children, teach them what it means to be an African-American woman in America. Right? Educate yourself, educate those, get educated by those who know a bit more than you. There's plenty of resources and books out there. But I think I'd give the same advice to anyone who's raising a young white man, right? A young white boy. Let him know who he is and what that means in America, right? We all have to be aware of who we are and how to move within the spaces we're in. And I think that's the best way to equip your children with the resources they'll need to succeed in the world.
I think everybody should be required to take an African American studies class. And so Barbara, or like a course, a series of courses, because I think that kind of to Andre's earlier point, that we don't have a clear understanding of the history of Black people in this country. So Barbara, I mean, it's an undertaking, right? It's not just a conversation with your children, but I would say that taking an African American studies course would probably give you some really interesting, valuable perspective that you could have conversations with your children about for years to come. André.
You know, I am the son of parents who are from the South, who came here through the Great Migration, the last wave. They raised me in this Mississippi of the South, Mississippi of the West, as we call Las Vegas, without the certain protections of Southern culture and community. So they did the best that they could do, raising me and my brother in Las Vegas, right? And so what they taught us was that from a very young age, ongoing, you have to try twice as hard to be seen half as good. People are going to think ill of you simply because you're Black. mind what you say and what you do in public, because people are going to judge you and think that something ill is going to be your intent. I've had to have the talk as a young person about my interactions with police. I've had to give my nephew that same talk. And these are things that we have to tell our young children how they're going to navigate their lives. And you probably have to tell that to mixed children. But I think that if non-Black people understood these conversations that we're having, that people are having in their homes, and if they wanted to explain like to their children, like, why is this happening? Then they could know like, well, for Black people in America, it's a struggle. Violence is always set upon them and inflicted upon them. They are oppressed, or however you want to gauge it. And so sometimes when tensions get riled up, this is a way that we try to ease tension and make change. That's these sort of conversations in whatever language of the child needs to happen in each and every household, and not gloss over these issues, because these issues play out in school, on the playground, in the workplace, and when you're going to Starbucks. This racial tension is always there, especially if you're Black, especially if you seem to look Black, because people otherwise don't know what to do or think about you. And so if we can start having these real conversations about how we got here and how we're going to get away from that, I think young people can kind of just grow up with this sense of like, yo, like, this is my Black friend. We're in the 8th grade together. His struggle is hard and real, but I'm going to make sure that if I see anything racist coming from my family or friends, I'm going to try to address it the best way I can, or I'm going to try to protect my Black friend. Like, that kind of stuff needs to happen. And we have to start giving our young people tools to protect themselves, and then to also protect their Black friends.
I think that's a really great place for us to be able to kind of talk about allyship. When we look at our non-Black allies, I want to acknowledge, like, obviously we're all Black folks here in this conversation, and we have a diverse audience of people that are tuning in. I know that there are a lot of questions coming from non-Black people about allyship and what should we be doing. And I'm sure we have gotten a text message or an email or a phone call that we did not want to respond to, or like, you know, how can I help, or what should I be doing, or whatever. And I don't want to speak for everybody, but I can speak for myself. But I want to open it up to the conversation about allyship, because even in this situation for Barbara and for many others, I'm sure, being an ally and a parent, or being an ally and a coworker, or being an ally and a friend is a bit challenging. So Imani, I see you're unmuted, so I'll let you jump in here.
Thanks so much. I just wanted to add, just sort of to echo what the panelists have said, you know, it's really important to have these conversations. And I think a lot of times we wonder, are we the appropriate person to have this conversation, or is this person too old to have this conversation, or too young? And the thing is, these conversations need to be had, because just because we're not always sure about when to have them, people are having these experiences, and these 4-year-olds may have already, and have probably already had some sort of experience that maybe they haven't been able to name. And so I just wanted to name that. And I think, you know, as their parent, that you would be the best person to figure out how to have that conversation. But I would want to encourage you to have that conversation, you know, and I think that's important, that we don't have to be perfect at doing it. We just have to try. And a lot of times that would be enough. And I think for it to be an ally for our community, that we have to be thoughtful, and we have to make a commitment to ask challenging questions, to listen to the answers, and really believe the people that are telling us. And we also then have to be prepared to make changes, even if it's uncomfortable, because we know that it won't always be comfortable. Getting to equity is sometimes going to be giving up privilege, and that does not always feel good. And in fact, it typically doesn't. So this will have to be a practice, something that we do every day. It's a muscle that we grow. And we also want to make sure that so that we can have these conversations, we need to build relationships with folks. You know, it hasn't been my experience that you can just have these difficult conversations without building with folks. Because when you're able to build with folks, build a relationship and actually have a commitment to this is something that we are committed to doing, then these are the types of things that will happen when you're not in the room. And I think that's what it means to get to this next level. You know, I know I don't always love the term ally, but sometimes comrade is a better word, or you know, something that works for you. But I think all of these things are it's a commitment, and it's something we have to really work for. And I just also want to name too that, you know, when we talk about issues of racial justice, you know, as someone who leads an organization working with LGBTQ people, I think it's also important to talk about the intersection of LGBTQ identity and racial justice, and what it looks like to work for equality for folks that are experiencing oppression at multiple levels. Because it's not enough to just talk about racial justice or just to talk about LGBTQ equality, because like when I walk in, I don't just experience one part of my identity. I experience racism, I experience heterosexism, I experience sexism, and these are all things that I'm feeling simultaneously. And so having a conversation about racial justice without sexual orientation really isn't getting to the bottom of the person that I am. And I think that when we're talking about folks working in community, that's something that hopefully people are thinking about as well. That when we work with people, when we come from the perspective of people that are experiencing oppression at multiple levels, then we're all going to be brought up from that. And so when our comrades are out talking about, you know, LGBTQ equality, that we're all that they're also talking about racial justice. They're also talking about economic justice and gender justice and being inclusive in all of the ways that in all the things that we're doing.
You were talking about the most marginalized among us and really compound oppression, if you will. And I think that really makes me think about our trans and gender diverse folks and the different ways that they experience racism and all of the different types of bias. I want to kind of touch on that. And I mean, obviously this week we learned the names, or this week and the week prior, we learned the names of Tony McDade and Ayanna Dior in ways that we should have never learned their names. And I'm really curious to hear from you all. What are some of the challenges that our trans and gender diverse siblings and loved ones face, not only regarding police brutality, but also within this movement? Dallas, I'll let you jump in. Yeah.
Yeah, so I see the biggest issue they face is a lack of understanding, right? I mean, just a few minutes ago, we were having kind of this discussion about how it's difficult for non-people of color to really understand the historical context and what people of color are dealing with. It is a Herculean task to get a heterosexual, a cis man to really understand what it's like for a African-American transgender woman and what they're feeling inside, right? To be able to get that empathy that is so needed in order to reform things, right? To sometimes give people just the simple respect that they're due. It's really difficult to try and somehow convey to people what others are understanding. And I think in this particular example, it's even more difficult. And that leads to anger. It leads to confusion. You're a male and you're attracted to this female and you find out that they were born a male, and for some reason that inspires rage, right? It's because you can't understand what that means about you or what that means about them. And so, in my opinion, I think that's the biggest hurdle we face, is just trying to get people to have a little understanding and some empathy.
I think to that point, I often think about allies and the conversation around what they should be doing. And I think oftentimes it's a lot more listening than it is talking, right? It's a lot more asking questions and really having an open ear. Assemblymember Kamlager, I would love for you to kind of talk about, from a policy perspective, what are some of the major challenges that our trans and gender diverse folks are seeing, and what kinds of ways can we move the needle on that?
Yeah, I want to respond to what Dallas and Imani just shared. Roxanne Gay said, we don't need allies, but we need folks to stand up and take on the problems born of oppression as their own. And remove yourself from that distance. And so that is what we need to do. I am actually tired of talking about what it means to be Black. And I'm tired of explaining what it means to be Black. I want to ask, what part of my Blackness is triggering the brokenness in who you are that causes you to rage against me? And you can take Black out and you can substitute it with trans, you can substitute it with whatever is in you. But we really have to Dallas's point, talk about what it is that's broken in someone else that makes them feel like they have to rage against me, my body, my soul, my person, my Blackness, who I am. And I don't need to be there for that conversation. You have to have it with yourself and other folks that are around you that are broken. And you know who those people are. We walk around and we act like, we're not racist or sexist or homophobic or xenophobic, but we know you can spot that. You can spot the person who's a little off. And so we have a responsibility, if we are like them, to sort of, check them. I sit on public safety, the Public Safety Committee here in California, and we have a ton of bills that really sort of hurt my soul because there's so much bias written in the language and people just have no understanding that if this thing gets passed, it's going to disproportionately impact X people. But last year we passed a bill that talked about trans folks in jail and in prison, and to allow them to identify based on the gender that they see themselves rather than what the warden or the facility, how they see them. Because folks should be able to be in the institutions that make sense for them. So I'm not trans. I had a lot of questions about, how this would work and how do you make sure that the folks who are in the facilities really sort of understand and have gone through the training and want to make this work, and how do you make sure that you don't put folks who are already incarcerated, in any more peril. But I had to vote for that bill. I had to, because I had to say, I'm not to, just because I have questions, I'm not going to stand in the way of progress. I'm not going to stand in the way of groups who have been working on this, who say we also don't have all of the answers, but we know this is the right thing to do based on the data that's coming out of these jails and prisons about how our trans community is being treated. Difficult. You have lots of folks in the assembly who are not interested in passing bills that say conversion therapy is bad. I can't believe we had to vote on that in 2018, who are not interested in passing this particular bill, who are not interested in understanding the plight of young LGBT youth who suffer from internet bullying and other things that are happening on the internet, and how to protect them and their privacy. If you're not gay or lesbian or trans, you can have certain questions, but at the end of the day, you have to rely on your comrades, to Imani's word, to say, okay, this is what we have to do. We have to lean into this. Even though I don't have all of the answers, I have to lean into this because this is about progress and it's about helping me understand some things that I might not know. Those are the things that we're dealing with in 2020.
Yeah. André or Dallas, can you guys talk about what some of the policy things are that are happening in Nevada specifically as it relates to trans and gender diverse folks? Since both of you are in Nevada, either one of you can take that question. Don't both jump at once. André, okay.
André, yeah, you want to talk about what Silver State Equality is looking to do in the next session?
Yeah, I will first speak to the panic defense bill that was passed in the last legislative session with a big help with Senator Dallas Harris and Senator Melanie Scheibel, who are both on the board of Silver State Equality, where we implemented the panic defense bill to allow protections for those who, if someone murders or inflicts harm against someone who's transgender, that they can't use the defense that they panicked in the moment, and that's why they killed someone who's trans. And so that's taking away that stigma and that transphobia-ism out of legislation is a part of what we're doing in Nevada with HIV modernization work that we're looking to further in Nevada, looking at folks who are living with HIV and disproportionately affected through the criminal justice system related to their HIV status. We are looking at seniors, and we were going to do some work in the school systems, but because of COVID, we had to adjust our legislative agenda. But we are constantly advocating for the rights and protections for transgender people in Nevada, so that their everyday lived lives are protected. And it's very necessary, unfortunately, because women are seen as less than as men, Black people are seen as less than, period. Therefore, Black women are at the very bottom of the social strata. So if you add a trans Black woman, they're even further at the bottom. And eventually we want to get to the point where we can implement policies where it's a requirement for LGBTQ training and trans training across spectrums. So we have folks that have done work to get cultural competency trainings done through healthcare and healthcare facilities, which is fantastic. We got a bill passed to help with training for the child welfare and juvenile justice systems, but there's so much more work to do. So we've been on the ground for a little over 2 years. So with folks like Senator Parks and Senator Spearman, and again, Senator Dallas Harris and Melanie Scheibel, we're going to continue to do all of this work, and we're always looking for the nuances of our everyday lives, to how we can better impact the lives of people who are transgender and gender diverse.
Okay, so we are in our last, I don't know how we're already 52 minutes in. We have a series of questions that came in from folks that are tuned in, and I want to try and speed through them. And so I'll have you just raise your hand if you feel like you are a person that can answer the question. This first question comes from Gregory. It says, our societal attention span is so short. How can we keep these vitally important issues on the front burner and media stops when the media stops paying attention? And I'll start that answer by saying, I think that the attention span being short is fine, because protest is gonna fall out of the news cycle by the time the next thing comes around, right? Whether that's a second wave of COVID or whatever it is. But I think what will make it valuable, what will be able to keep us having conversations about this, is what we do next, right? The way that we are able to action, to make these things actionable, the way that we can take these things and move them in plans or with policy or with elections or things like that. I think that is how we can bring this to the forefront of the conversation again and continue to keep it there. We are fortunate, if we can look at it that way, that we do have a major election coming up only months away. And so I think that is part of what is important. Sydney, did you want to jump in?
You said it. If people start, getting distracted, say November, November, November.
Yeah. I hear Barack Obama. Don't boo, vote. Dallas, yes.
So I personally offer to any of my friends, if they have trouble maintaining their outrage, to just simply send me a text message and I'll send them another video. I got an archive. If you need something to be mad at, I got plenty that'll keep you upset. The other advice I've been trying to give to people is to make sure they continue to bring this into every discussion that they have, right? The next time they're talking about how we police or the militarization of police, or we're talking about budgets or how we allocate funds, bring this into that discussion. It needs to be a part of every discussion, not just because of George Floyd, but because of what happens every day.
All right. That's fantastic. The idea of texting you for something to be angry about. Not even gonna, yeah. We have a question from Kathy that asks, please speak to reparations and how they can practically assist with economic inequality. What should the priority be for reparations? André said, oh, I got this one. André, what you got?
I feel like I'm on Jeopardy right now. No, I think people don't understand that when slavery ended, people that were formerly enslaved got nothing. They had nowhere to go. They had access to no sense of income. And when they tried to get universal healthcare for all Americans, including Black folks. They decided that they didn't want to implement universal healthcare because it would then give healthcare to Black folks. And because of these things that happen where opportunities were taken away from Black people, reparations are needed to get us on an even keel. And so with the GI Bill, a lot of Black veterans did not have access to those benefits. So it was racialized, unfortunately. My parents' generation, they're baby boomers. And so as far as Black Americans, my parents' generation, the baby boomers, are going to be the first generation out of 600 years where they actually have generational wealth to pass down to their kids. This is 1940s and 1950s. And so I'm really going to be, my dad got some sort of, well, let me put his business out there. But then I'm going to be like the first in my entire lineage of my family to have some sort of generational wealth passed down to me. So it's an uneven playing field, and not because we are unable, but because these opportunities were taken away from us. So reparations in theory and in practice would right all of that, but we're caught up in not understanding our history to where we get politics get in the way, as it did for reparations not to be given to us in the first place, in order for us to continuously be held in check. So we are constantly being oppressed, and reparations is one way that we could sort of level the playing field in theory.
One thing I like to always include in the conversation about reparations is I think we're a few steps away from ever being able to take that seriously. I think America has to acknowledge the history, right, before it can even begin to address and assess what the impact of that was, and then we can try and figure out how we can repair, that history. Sydney, I saw your hand up.
I was just going to say, for all of the listeners and the viewers who are from California or who know someone who lives in California, there are two bills working their way through the legislature. One is ACA 5, which I mentioned, which would put on the ballot an initiative to repeal Prop 209, which was our anti-affirmative action initiative from about 20-something years ago. The other one is a bill, AB 3121, which is our reparations bill, which would create a task force to look at proposals on how California deals with the issue around reparations and slavery. So if folks are there, are here somewhere from California, please call your representatives, because we've been having such a hard time getting people to understand why these are important.
Question from Melissa says, how can we work to bridge the divide between people of color in the movement? I've had to have a lot of conversations with some of my Hispanic relatives on why we should be supporting the BLM movement. Anyone want to take that one? Dallas, yes.
I hate to kind of harp on the same points, but I got a video of a Hispanic American being shot on suspect of stealing a bike, which, by the way, was his bike, because he took his hat off, and the cops were afraid. Oh, and by the way, they shot his friend who was standing next to him too. He died, his friend's in the hospital, and the police were let off. This is not an issue that will only, reforming the system is not going to benefit only African Americans. The police brutality is not solely an African American problem. Racism, disparity, solely not an African American problem. And I think as long as everyone can understand, we're all in this together to benefit everybody. That's how we get other people in and along.
Imani?
Just to add to that, we talk about how racism exists within the LGBTQ community, but we don't always talk about how anti-Blackness does. And I want to be really clear, because I very firmly believe that people of color cannot be racist. That's not how oppression works. You have to be in a position of power to have that. So I want to be really clear about that. And also that people can be incredibly problematic and can be anti-Black. And this does not benefit us. And I think that's really important, that when we are pit against each other that way, that we don't stand to benefit from that. We are experiencing oppression in similar ways, and we should come together, because this will be the strongest way that we can overcome oppression. But separating ourselves like that, racism and anti-Black sentiments don't benefit us, and it especially hurts communities of color.
Absolutely. I don't know if we're gonna, again, unique element of being on video. I think we are okay if we cross over the 60-minute mark right here in 40 seconds. They say no, keep going. Okay, I'll take this last question, but I don't want to keep everyone. Yes, André.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, you know, Hispanic people sometimes think that they're absolved from these issues around racism and discrimination, although, you know, of course, they feel it. You know, a lot of people of color have the ability to align themselves with whiteness, and not that Black people want to do that, but Black people don't have that sort of option, and that's not our thing. But the justice system is using immigration, detainment, and deportation as a form of criminalizing people who are Hispanic, Latino, Latinx. And so while Black people and increasingly brown people are dealing with the criminal justice system on like status offenses and all these other sort of charges, there's this thing going on with immigration where a lot of people are being deported, and this stream is being used as a way to sort of minimize Hispanic and people's ability to live. And so while this is going on in Black people's world, this is a whole other thing going on, and we just have to see it for what it is. It's like we have our new Jim Crow going on, and there's this whole other sort of Jim Crow thing going on with the immigration system. And so we have to realize that we are all in this together, as Assemblywoman Sydney mentioned. Like, this is all of our responsibility to be aware of and to do something about it, because we just all need to make sure that we have the rights and liberties that are afforded to us.
I said that I felt like we could see some kind of change happen if we can take the next steps. And I think as we say goodbye here, I would love for everyone to talk about, for just a moment, what do they feel like people can do next after, you know, these protests have started to die down, or even as the protests continue? What are some things, if you all have like one thing that you feel like people should be doing to be able to keep this momentum going? Dallas, I see you nodding, which makes me think you have something. So I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I know you said one, but I got three. And it's
one of them is a video.
So I'm putting them all out here. No video. Go over the video. They're in the video for this. One thing, vote. Everybody's got to vote. Register to vote. Go register your friends to vote. Two, forever and ever, call out racism when you see it. I don't care if it's your family members or your friends. They're telling a racist joke, don't laugh. Just, you know, stand up even when there isn't someone of that particular race who's there and you think might be offended. Be offended even when there's someone who's not there. And then the third thing is, for anyone on the stream who's African American, I just have one call, and it's really simple. I want you all to think about just one question: how many generations free are you? If you haven't figured that out, take a second and think about it, and carry that number with you as you move through life and you have these conversations, and try and share with others what we can do together to make the world a better place. Thank you.
Imani, I'll let you go next. What do you think people should be doing next to make sure that we can maintain this momentum and see some change?
Thanks so much. You know, honestly, I'd like us to pay attention to what's happening next. You know, so often we see that after times like this, that the same sort of things happen, that there are going to be more trainings, more listening sessions, more binders of things that go on shelves. But actually to look at the results, we actually want to see our communities better taken care of. We want to see better health outcomes for our communities. We want to see people that aren't in prison. Like, we want to see actual outcomes. So how will these things translate to better outcomes? And if they're not translating to better outcomes, then these aren't the solutions that people have spent their time out here for. So I would say do that. Let's look at what happens next, and how is this different than what's happened before.
André, I'll let you go next. What should people be doing next to continue this momentum?
Yeah, I think some concrete things is for people to understand that we all have biases, implicit biases, and that we all need to check those. And so you can go to type in Harvard implicit bias test, and you can take a test to find out where your biases lie around gender, race, class, weight, religion, that sort of thing. I have a bias towards Black people and LGBTQ people and Mariah Carey and Janet Jackson, although that didn't come up in the test, but they're still there.
You're just so homosexual with yourself just now.
Just being real. But I think when we are sitting at the tables on the job and we're looking at data and we see that Black people are at the bottom of the worst list and the top of the bottom of the best list and top of the worst list, that we don't just say like, oh, okay, but we have to really look and say like, why is it that there are a large number of Black kids in foster care? Why are there a large number of Black people in the criminal justice system? Why don't we have Black people working in our offices? Like, and have those real conversations, look at sort of policy decisions and practice decisions that have been made. But then also like, just don't be racist and don't be transphobic and don't be homophobic and don't be xenophobic and don't be misogynist. And if you don't know what those mean, just look it up. And if you recognize yourself in it, it's okay, because at some point we're all on that spectrum somewhere. And I'm, being lighthearted and funny about it, but it's true. We all got our stuff going on. If we just admit that we got our stuff going on, just like we need to admit that America has some nightmares it needs to face, then I think we can move forward a little differently.
Assemblymember Sydney.
Yeah, thank you. I would say echo a lot of the sentiments shared by the other panelists. Look at the data. It's out there and it is telling the truth. And it's been out there for a really long time. We're trying to figure out how else to put it together so that people understand it. But at some point, you just have to say, no, it's here. And so the question is, why are you so indifferent about it? So I ask people to look at it and to check their own indifference. I also want folks to kind of reflect about, who are your homies? Who are your friends? What does your workplace look like? If you go into the office and you see that everybody looks like you need to have a moment of reflection. If you look at your inner circle and you say, wow, this is a pretty homogenous group, then that's probably one of the reasons why you're so removed from the challenges and the perils of how so many of us are living and struggling through our lives. But you have to look at that. And so often we our comrades, say, oh, well, I do have a Black friend, or they have the token of the one. And you have to go deeper than that. There is a reason why you're not integrating, because so many Black folks, so many folks in the LGBT community, we have to integrate. We have to integrate. So I ask people to look at that. I also hope that folks will be supportive of new kinds of legislation and policy like the one that I mentioned around community response to emergency situations, so that we don't have law enforcement coming in. We don't need a level 10 response to level 2 problems. That is something that we should all be talking about across this country. And lastly, just think about what James Baldwin said to Angela Davis when she was in jail. He said, they'll come for me in the morning if they came for you last night. So if you think that you're not in this, you've got another thing coming.
I think that is a great last word. Thank you so much to all of you. I know we're over time. If you could all take 10 seconds and tell people where they can find out more information about the work that you do. Imani, I'll have you go first.
I'm at the National Center for Lesbian Rights, nclrights.org. Thanks so much.
Of course. André, where can people find out more about you and what you're doing?
silverstateequality.org, and hit me up on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter.
Dallas, same question.
Dallas Harris for Nevada.com, or at Dallas Harris NB on Twitter.
And finally, Assemblymember Sydney, where can people find out more about you and what you're doing?
Wow, SydneyKamlager.com, at Sydney Kamlager on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. That is my website. I'm everywhere.
All right. I want to thank all of you. My name is Jarrett Hill. You can find me everywhere on social media at Jarrett Hill, 2 R's and 2 T's. And my show, Fan Ties, every Thursday, new episodes every Thursday, wherever you get your podcasts. I want to say this has been the most effective use of the mute button I've ever seen on the digital panel. You all have been fantastic. Thank you for joining me. Thank you all for watching. Have a great day, and go out there and take some action.